Okay, we're rolling. Here we go. This is going to be a presentation. I'm going to talk about a book today called The Pressure Principle by Dr. Dave Alfred. As always, this channel is basically me providing hopefully entertaining content. What I'm doing right here is I'm riding my electric unicycle from Washington Crossing, Pennsylvania, the famous site where George Washington crossed the Delaware, to New Hope. I'm riding along the Delaware River canal path here. So what we're going to do is just talk about this book that I read recently that I think is really applicable to poker. As always, kind of the point of this content and putting myself out there is to find people to collaborate with to do big things inside and outside of poker. So that's just a kind of general idea of why I'm doing this, but let's get into this book here. The Pressure Principle I thought was just a fantastic book, really, really strong, and I gained a lot of things from it. What it is, Dr. Dave Alfred is basically a performance coach to high-end athletes, and he kind of talks about his systems that he goes through. So the book is dedicated to all who think they can, and that's kind of a pretty good summary of what the book is about. It's about shaping mindset so that we can perform better. What is pressure? Dave wants to define that as the interference with the ability to concentrate on a process which consciously or unconsciously causes deterioration in our technique. So he has a lot of different ways to handle said issues, and we're just going to go through them right now. The first one is kind of defining anxiety. Anxiety is both trait and state, so it's your general personal level, and then a specific sort of event may change more of a state anxiety. As I go through this book, I'm just going to kind of cover the general points, but one real thing that kind of drives anxiety is having a don't miss mindset. The book's full of anecdotes that go through his coaching life, but that really kind of help and explain all this. But what he uses for this is he had a bunch of bowlers in cricket, basically all try to have a competition to like bowl the best ball and try to make the target. And they were doing incredibly well. It was very competitive. And then they changed it just to reframe it. The winner of the competition would be the ones who don't miss. And so the anxiety level of all these people then thinking like I'm going to lose and thinking about missing caused them to start missing more. I think it was just really powerful to kind of understand that. And I think it relates to poker a lot. Every single hand that we're playing, if we get a premium, are we in the mindset like, oh, here we go, I'm going to make a lot of money? Or is it more of the mindset like, oh no, here we go, like, this could be bad for me. So as he talks about anxiety, there's definitely ways to combat that, which goes through a lot of the book. But the first is command posture. You may be familiar with that already, but that's basically just sitting upright, making yourself feel bigger, taking deep breaths. And there's a really huge psychosomatic component to that our brains relax by, making our physical presence bigger and just more comfortable. The brain and the body are very much intertwined like that. There's no separating the two in terms of how, you can physically act can also really change your mental state. So a lot of anxiety and, ways to manage and cope with that are just going to be through simple things like command posture and breath work. Dave talks about the idea of improving through a C to J style of improvement. C to J is coming from his terms of like rugby kicking. You can think of a C obviously as kind of more of like the swooping in on like more of a parabola and just kind of like lining up right at the end and booting it, while J is kind of just striking through on top of it, more of like a Cristiano Ronaldo type of soccer kick. And the idea there is we want to be moving towards our J states whenever we can. It's just more powerful, more commanding. So the book will get more into that later, but C to J is some of the terminology that's pretty important in this chapter. And he closes out talking about anxiety and butterflies. And you know what that is? It's just adrenaline. It's the ability to get things done. Top level performers still get anxiety all the time across all fields. And it's just that people who are better to harness that anxiety and those butterflies are just going to be sort of more capable. The different topics that Dave goes about in his book are all intertwined through language. Language is really one of the most important things. It's the ability to reframe and make positive the circumstance. It's not going to change the circumstances, but it can change our perception, which is incredibly important. But going back to the concept of that don't miss, that's not really helpful. The language that Dave starts to talk about that is beneficial for us is productive language. We need to get into productive how-to language. Think of the positives that instead of don't miss, it's, aim tight and narrow, follow through, kind of things like that. Positives, productive is how we reframe language. And there's so much more to that, but I'm just trying to get some bullet points through on this. And so we never want to kind of use like never and always in our language. It's too much of a dangerous absolute. In effective decision-making, language promotes the most effective choices, not exactly like the right or wrong ones or the always or nevers. So how do we use language correctly? Once we start to train it, the best way to do it is through affirmations. Affirmations evoke confidence and performance. They can be used in the short term and the long term. But the way to use them is essentially, if I do this, then I will get that. I think that it's probably pretty powerful to create some of your own affirmations in poker, whether that's helping with tilting or just, making sure you're always staying focused. Affirmations become incredibly powerful, and it's definitely worthwhile to think about, are you using them in poker? So language is just great. It directly increases our self-esteem and is fundamental to helping us reach our full potential. It's how we frame everything. It's how we improve. It's how we understand concepts. So language just can't be understated how important it is. Now, talking about managing learning, if you don't get the correct response, you should probably try to change the perspective. It's not always on, the person. Maybe they're just not hearing it the right way if you're not getting the results you want. And this is obviously coming from a coach to student perspective, but it's really important for the coach. And, a lot of us are sort of self-coaching our ways through poker. So we have to kind of treat things like we have to message our perspective correctly. Learning gets into an area that becomes challenging that Dave considers the ugly zone. That's where things are hard, we're not getting it, and we all know that feeling. It's kind of we want to give up when things aren't going great, when we're learning a skill, and we just want to quit because it gets hard and we're not good at it. Oh, this is pretty cool. Going across this area, I wasn't really sure with all the water overflow, but that was fun. So anyway, the ugly zone is basically an area that the energy spent, if you're thinking of a graph, and sort of like the energy required, as both of those go up and get higher, they move to like the upper right on a graph, we're going to approach our comfort zone where the lower left of the graph, or the ugly zone where the lower left of the graph is more of our comfort zone. So the ugly zone is nothing to be scared about. What we're doing is creating new neural pathways to overcome these things. It takes time, so we just keep like working through it, this ugly zone, and we have to manage our learning as we go through it. So, you think about like a younger kid, when they try and fail, sometimes they can get upset, but generally they're just kind of playing and continue to keep trying. So we want to kind of take that approach to our own learning as we go. The next chapter is called Implicit Explicit, and it's talking about how we have sort of conscious thoughts and our subconscious that direct everything. And implicit explicit issues when it comes down to performance is we can overload basically our conscious mind with too many thoughts, and it causes us to sort of break down, and the subconscious ways just start falling apart. It's like an iceberg. At the top you have sort of the conscious thoughts, and underneath is all the abilities of your bodies to just kind of handle that thing. Like, kick the ball requires just all these different footwork and breath and body control and everything like that. But if we start overloading our thoughts of kick the ball, there's just way too many. Our deterioration is going to happen physically because our bodies we have too much up in our head. So this is kind of akin to, Dave would say, computer desktop, where we have like an app or a folder or something like that that has all the sub processes underneath. We don't want to be opening that folder when we're just trying to run the program. We don't want to be like navigating through all the different parts. We just want it to work. So we don't want to be loading up and like kind of going through all the details, because that's what causes basically choking. It's he considers it a very harsh term for when we lose the sort of like that implicit ability to do something due to explicit pressure. So it all happens. It's a very common thing. A lot of people just choke in circumstances that are extremely explicitly difficult. And Dave talks how to manage some of that later on in next chapters. But he really thinks one of the most important things is that we can have sort of self-appraisal and balance about all of this. You know, when we're self-appraising and trying to be balanced, we're forgiving of the things that are challenging. We're not kind of too harsh on ourselves. And, you know, we're relating it to ourselves. Our self-appraisal, we're the people who know ourselves the best. So we have to be kind of honest with ourselves and just really talk about and be able to recognize what we're feeling in the moment. It becomes very, very helpful to understand that. So that was a quick of the chapter that involved implicit, explicit. The main thing there is to remember is that it's like our mind is like an iceberg, and we don't want to kind of go too top heavy for certain things, which can happen all the time if you relate it to poker. Just overthinking instead of just letting kind of natural poker tendencies run and play when we're at a table. So behavior. Obviously, this is kind of what we can do before the match and at the match. It's our behavior, but we want to train for the match. I mean, the match is where all that matters. That's where all those like extra explicit things may happen. That's where the competition's the highest. That's where you have just one shot to get it right. So what do we want to do? We want to train for match behavior. Now, how do we do that? Dave's process is called repair, training, and match. And repair, and it's kind of like shaping. What are we doing? Repairing is working on the technique. We're shaping kind of the skill set, right? And then training is just the repetition of that skill set. It's over and over and over again. Training is the practice that makes things work. The repetition to get good, to perform at the match level. What is this for poker? You know, this is essentially you're trying to maybe study 4-bet pots. So the repair for that is just loading up your whatever GTO solve sim that you need and just kind of looking through the different ways to play 4-bet pots better. The training is then firing up your range trainer and playing those 4-bet pots over and over and over again with the knowledge of your strategy that GTO provided in the shaping stage. And then match would be going to the actual tables, and when you're in 4-bet pots, you're just a well-oiled machine ready to go. So behavior, there's a lot of amazing anecdotes in this book and stories because Dave's had access to just so many different sort of like sports stars and life experiences. This was a really cool chapter, but I'm just summarizing it up pretty quick there. I'm trying to keep pace with this video as well. So the next chapter is environmental. And environmental is obviously, it's kind of related to the match behavior thing. But environmental is all about managing dislocated expectations. That's when we get to the environment and something comes up, the field has changed, there's someone else there, you're just kind of thrown an issue that you weren't expecting for. Dave talks a lot about this in regards to military training, like Marines, they go for like a hump through the woods. They get to a location and they have to like build a shelter. And then they throw in the fact that, they can't have this tool or this thing happens that makes it much harder to survive. And training for the Army and Marines and stuff like that is constantly throwing dislocated expectations at people so they can handle the actual situation when it comes to the match correctly, because they don't get overloaded and they're able better to handle these dislocated expectations. So what you do in your environment counts as much as where that environment is. So environmental is, also just going to the stadium, the big day of the field, right? And just kind of doing a walkthrough. Related that to poker, if you're at the World Series of Poker final table, you probably want to go and be in that room beforehand, maybe know what it feels like to have, some TV cameras. Like how are you going to do that? It's tough, but these are things that will cause all these dislocated expectations and extra pressure that really become challenged to match and learn in the match environment. So when we're training our match environment, Dave has a matrix for sort of all the environmental factors that may come in this chapter, and working through those and understanding those is really important because that enhances our ability to better train for the environment so we are ready for the match. So I'm coming up here, just I'll talk about the video for a second. This is where New Hope is. We're looking across the Delaware River at Lambertville, New Jersey. There is the New Hope sort of bridge right there at the end. It's kind of hard to see, but that was the ride. I'm going to turn around and just ride back a little bit as I finish talking about the rest of this book. So the next chapter is sensory shutdown, and that's, we've all experienced that. When the pressure increases, our awareness decreases. So we have to concentrate kind of on the vitals when everything is shutting down, when we get into these situations. Our heartbeat kind of goes up, right? Our heart starts racing. It's a very natural thing, like talking about the mind-body connection then, that our ability to cognitively perform kind of declines. Our ability to physically perform, something that involves a lot of dexterity, goes down. But when the heart rate is up, we just have to be aware that our sensory shutdown is going to start happening. So I'm sure you've experienced that in poker. The way Dave starts talking about handling that is through things like command posture and self-talk. And self-talk is basically using a scanning sequence to stay focused. He talks a lot about pilots in this. Pilots use basically a self-talk process that goes like this: fly, navigate, communicate, administrate. And so like if you're a fighter jet pilot, as things get more intense, you're going to have just less ability to administrate, and then less ability to communicate, then less ability to navigate. And, you're basically just kind of flying as it gets really difficult. But if you kind of repeat this mantra as things are shutting down to yourself, you'll be able to then remember, oh, I have to navigate. Oh, I have to communicate. Oh, I have to administrate. Can you think about like what that may be like for poker? The heart's racing and you're in a hand, and what is your self-talk there? It may be something like, what is my equity? What are my expectations? What are then my actions? So you could really find a lot of self-talk that was probably extremely helpful. It's very personal to yourself at the poker table. It's, something I'm going to start trying more is trying to basically create this sort of self-talk mantra that really, really helps out. And the chapter ends with just talking a little bit more about training and how important it is to train harder than the match is going to be. If you're a baseball batter and you can get a machine that throws 105 mile per hour every single time, the 95 mile per hour fastball is going to look much slower. So train harder than the situation, and your body will be able to be, better coping the harder situation. And obviously, as probably understood, but the better physically fit you are, the more capable you are able to handle a lot of these circumstances, right? Our body is going to react a lot better if we're in shape, because it's just going to be able to handle all these like pressure and adrenaline dumps. So the very last thing here is thinking correctly. This is kind of the last chapter. This is thinking correctly under pressure, where you kind of like put it all together, where there's a process that we work on and there's an outcome. And sometimes the outcome is not what we expect. That's very obvious to the poker player. That's variance. And the process is how we get there. But we should have some sort of teacup, which is a thinking correctly under pressure teacup formula for ourselves to be able to handle the match events, right? This is our formula. It's going to be changing over time, but it's going to be this use of the sort of repairing and training and then match and affirmations and all the different things that we can do to manage our learning to get to this state where we're performing. Our teacup formula has a lot of variables in it, and the book goes into much better detail in breaking them down. But the idea is that we have a personal teacup formula for our own self-improvement that can guide us sort of in the moment in the match, and then long term, as we get better at something, we can kind of just make our teacup formula better to suit our skill set. Think of it like driving. When you're first beginning, your teacup is, checking all the mirrors and trying to figure out how much the throttle actually pushes the car and turning correctly and all these different things. When you become a more experienced driver, it's probably more about just checking your surroundings and, matching your speed appropriately to the road. And then you get even better into sort of like racing. And it's going to be, just much more minutia of how to stay going as fast as possible. And so our teacup formula would be evolving through all stages of learning as we do that. And you can certainly imagine a teacup formula for a beginner in poker to a more advanced one, just going through sort of like fit or fold mentalities to just like highly, highly involved like GTO decisions. All that's to say that when you are trying to perform, thinking correctly, the mindset should just kind of be like, simple couple thoughts to your subconscious. And it's basically like, just hit it, get it done. That's one of the best things that we can do at the end of the day, is to have just a more productive mindset, displacing these unproductive thoughts, giving ourselves a self-talk that is really sort of powerful and easy to follow and understand and productive. So that was the book. I thought it was fantastic. It has a lot more details in it, a lot more anecdotes, a lot more stories, but in general, I found a lot of relevant things to poker, and I wanted to take some time to share them. I think that it would really, really help out with anyone trying to get better. Mindset is so important in poker right now, and having learned some of this myself, I think my mindset has tremendously gotten better. So I think I'm just going to let the ride play out for a couple more minutes, but that was a presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you've gotten this far and you're interested in talking to me about poker or other things, I have a Discord channel now that you can find in the comments. And if you go in there, I've incentivized the first few people to get in there to read around. I'm going to offer basically some free coaching of play and explain videos for anyone who is interested in doing that. So I appreciate you all following along with me for this. Thanks so much for being on the ride here today. I thought it was a really nice one down the Delaware Canal, and I hope you have a wonderful day.